Hello and welcome to Walter's World on February the 17th, 2013, which in the Hebrew calendar is the 7th of Adar, 5773. I am Walter Bingham, and my special guest for the whole program today is one of the world's leading Torah scholars and academics, the eminent Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who will be talking with me about his early youth, his life's philosophy, and, of course, his world-renowned work on the whole of the Babylonian Talmud. A society must ask, seek, and demand that each individual give something of himself. From the sum of these small offerings, it can then build itself anew. If all of us light the candle of our souls, the world will be filled with light. Not my words, but those of my guest, the eminent Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, now known as Even Israel, who is regarded as one of the world's leading scholars and rabbis. Born in Jerusalem in 1937 to secular parents, young Steinsaltz studied physics, chemistry, mathematics, and sociology at Hebrew University, in addition to rabbinical studies. Following graduation, he established several experimental schools and at the age of just 23 became Israel's youngest high school principal, to my best knowledge and belief, a record still unbroken. And then he went on to found the Israel Institute for Talmudic Publications. To date, he has published some 60-plus books and hundreds of articles on subjects ranging from zoology to theology to sociology and social commentary, religious thought, historical biography, philosophy, Jewish mysticism, and, of course, the Talmud. These books have been translated into Russian, English, French, Portuguese, Swedish, Japanese, and Dutch. His commentary on Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, was even translated into Chinese and published in 1996. But Rabbi Steinsaltz is best known for his interpretation and basic commentary of the Babylonian Talmud. A 46-volume task he began more than 46 years ago now and is widely sold as the Steinsaltz Talmud. And there are also other editions now published by Koren Publishers of Jerusalem. In Israel, Rabbi Steinsaltz is the dean of the Mekor Chaim network of schools, which encompasses kindergarten through to high school, and in 1988 he received the Israel Prize, the country's highest cultural honor. Rabbi Steinsaltz was also very involved in the future of the Jews in the former Soviet Union, having set up various educational institutions for Jews still living there. Newsweek magazine said of him, quote, "Jewish law is filled with tales of formidable rabbis. Probably none living today can compare in genius and influence to Adin Steinsaltz, whose extraordinary gifts as scholar, teacher, scientist, writer, mystic, and social critic have attracted disciples from all factions of Israeli society." I am privileged that Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz has agreed to give me some of his valuable time. Welcome to the program.
Thanks.
Just tell me briefly something about your work in the former Soviet Union.
At that time, there was no relations between the State of Israel and Russia. And I'm an Israeli citizen. And to do any work there was almost impossible. But I found some kind of a lead. Strangely enough, my first important meeting about this subject was done of all places in Oxford. I met there a very important Russian scientist, and we somehow got very well together. And from this time on, it took some time of preparation, mishaps in the Soviet bureaucracy and other bureaucracy, but 89. And I practically began some work in Russia. The work changed with the time. It contained also a stable basis in the city of Moscow. We tried from time to time in making small branches in other places. But it was teaching in very different levels and very different ways. And at the beginning, it was practically the only Jewish institution that had any kind of an official standing. It wasn't in hiding, it was open, and people could come there. Among other things, I spent time in visiting places from the utmost west point of Russia, which is in Kaliningrad, which was known as Königsberg, to Khabarovsk on the Pacific Ocean.
Do you speak any Russian?
Very little. And more than that, the Russians, like some people, are very, very particular about their language. So very particular that if you don't speak Russian well, it's far better for you to keep quiet.
More than the French?
About in the same level as the French. In England, of course, your accent and your choice of words will place you socially in one level or another. But you can be a foreigner or even an inmate and still speak the language imperfectly. As long as you have something to say, people will listen. And if you have lots to say, people will listen more. In Russia, as in France, it's not just knowing the language, but knowing it perfectly is something that marks you as a Untermensch.
Are the institutions you found that they're still functioning?
Some of them are functioning, some of them changed. Basically, the work still continues with ups and downs. And
you go there sometimes?
Of course I go. There were times when I used to be there very often. Now I'm unfortunately also preoccupied in being in all kinds of other places, and I see too much geography to my own taste.
Well, let us hope that those Jews who are still left there will soon come home.
I do hope, even though Russian Jewry in that sense is in a very complicated position. The rate of intermarriage is there not just big, it is really enormous. The percentage of Jews that have both Jewish parents is perhaps about 5%. All the rest are intermarried. Intermarriage is also a sign and a way of mingling with the local population. Because I don't think that, generally speaking, the Russians as a people are particularly anti-Semitic. Therefore, in a certain way, mingling and assimilation is very easy. They would come because of economic pressure or because of feeling that they have no future. Now, for example, Jews can live and thrive there, and so some of them do. But still, there are now beginnings all over of small communities, small groupings of people that are not just Jewish by genetics, but they are consciously Jewish and want to get more into it. It is, in that sense, one of my reasons to go there, except for all kinds of sentiments, in many ways, because it's a frontier. Jewishly speaking, it was one of the most remote places.
Now, let me digress for a moment and ask you your view about the law of return here.
I think this law of return is far, far too wide. And with that, there are all kinds of people who basically don't have any connection and don't want to be connected. It's not just about halachic points. I'm saying, generally speaking, it is a community in which a fair part of it are not Jewish, not only not halachically, but not also by real identification. Some of them become members and part of Israel, but they in itself, they change Israel by their very being, and Israel is still not a very stable society. So anybody coming is changing a little bit the makeup of society and the development. In many other places, the number of those people who really don't belong and are really very far removed is too big. It should have been done many years ago. The lawmakers didn't even imagine that there could be a massive aliyah from anywhere. We now have lots of practical problems about how to deal with it, how to make it into a more or less unified, stable society.
Well, let me return to your life, your early life, in fact. I mentioned in the introduction that you had a secular upbringing and a very extensive academic education, which alone would have helped to build for you a successful future. And I think it's important for young secular Jews today to hear what moved you to become Torah observant. What was the trigger to turn you from that background into a Shomer Mitzvot, a follower of God's law, to become one of today's greats, if not the greatest authority and interpreter of our scriptures?
In my case, it's in a way unfortunate for any interviewer. I don't have anything of a spectacular story to tell. There wasn't nothing, neither in our family or in my personal life, traumatic or outstanding. I would say that possibly it was because something in my makeup is very skeptical. In a strange way, being a skeptical person, it wasn't enough for me not to believe in what they call the scriptures. I even came farther not to believe in my secular world. And therefore, there are lots of questions that rose from not being identified internally with the outside culture that was mostly dominant here. So I have my doubts. Sometimes it's a kind of a strange circle. You come to believe via the very unexpected way of doubting, of questioning. I won't say that it was the same thing of our father Abraham, but he seemed also to go to find the Almighty through moving and disbelieving in his own existence. So that's a different way. I cannot say that it was for everybody. But if you ask about myself, that was, I would say, the trigger. It was a kind of a natural push, and I have to add, it was strange, but I'm telling this story many a time. When I was about 10 years old, my father got for me a special teacher for Talmud. And I asked him, why? It wasn't that I was very reluctant. I didn't know much about it anyway. And so he says, look, I don't know what kind of a person you will grow up. You can become whatever you become. But one thing I'll tell you, in our family, there won't be anybody that is Am Haaretz.
An uneducated person.
It is worse than that. It is almost an offensive word. It's uneducated in a very derogatory way. My late father, who was all over the world.
What was his job?
He came as a chalutz in 1924 from Poland. He began the work with his hands. He was for many years a builder. And he used to show me this building and the other building in Jerusalem, telling me, you see, this is something that I have built on myself, my own hands. Then later on, he just couldn't physically go on with the job, so he did other things, opened a small factory and so on. And he was, in a strange way, connected almost every extreme of the Jewish society. Which means not only extreme in the left wing.
Socialist.
He was perhaps much farther to the left. But on the other hand, he still in the same time kept his relationship and his meeting with lots of his family and very religious, observant people. So somehow, even though I don't know very much about him, he was for so many years in all kinds of secret society. He was very reluctant to tell me about himself. But I knew that he was connected with different kinds of secrets all over the world. He would speak about everything except himself.
So your early youth, in which you already knew what was going on in the world, was in the early 40s. For what is easier to become Torah observant, certainly living in Palestine as he was then it would have been living in some other country in Europe.
There's quite a chance. And my parents tried to give me a certain amount of Jewish education. So I was never really an outsider and ignorant. And I got from other members of the family also much enforcement. But of course in Israel it is easier. On the other hand, if you compare it to many other countries, at the same time, the early 50s, which was my time of becoming more and more aware of myself, Israel then was more or less fixated in its own way. To become then something that is now quite commonplace, Baal Tshuva,
a returnee to the observance of Jewish religious law,
was as if I would say, I decided to become a dinosaur. It was a matter of sheer disbelief that something like this could happen. The idea was then that there is only one way, which is the grandfather is observant, the son is far less observant, and the grandson knows nothing and cares for nothing. That was something like law of nature. To go against the stream was extremely difficult, and I found that people were just astonished at something like this happening. It seemed to reverse the laws of nature. So it wasn't easier. It was then being a loner in many ways. It wasn't very hard on me by nature, but it wasn't easy being born in this city and grow up in this city and possibly still in love with the city. I knew all kinds of religious people, some of them very closely. I don't think that I took very much to them. Most of them, I had to undergo a great change in myself in order at least to appreciate something good about them.
You said there wasn't a particular trigger that turned you towards Torah observance. Was it a very gradual process, or did it happen fairly quickly?
It was quite gradual, even though it was in my teens. It wasn't that I waking up one morning and shouting to everybody, Eureka! It was a matter of slow change, slow acknowledging of things that are more important, less important. It was surely not an easy and abrupt way. My observation about Jews, and in a certain way I was at least something of an expert on the whole movement of Tshuva in its different stages, different forms. I would say that partially by our very nature as Jews, a conversion is not a common experience among Jews. They are among Goyim, it's far more common. So among Jews, usually it is a much slower process. It, of course, can peak at a certain point when a person has, in one way or another, to declare himself for himself or for others, where he stands.
To say that from today on I will lay tefillin every day.
You can say it, but that needs a long process of preparation before that. Now, I think that is when Moses speaks to the Lord, asking forgiveness for the sin of the golden calf. He says there, Ki am k'orefu. If you translate it literally, and many of the commentators cannot accept it literally, they say, what do you mean Ki am k'orefu? Because they are obstinate people. It is not a reason to forgive them, just the opposite. And so the Ramban, I like generally very much, he writes about it. He thinks it's not as other people said. And he says, look, these people are obstinate people. They don't change very fast. He says to the Lord, you cannot expect them to be idol worshippers 3 months ago and to become true believers in one moment. It will take them years. And he says, but when they will stick to you, they will keep it. I think it's a nature of which is Jew. It doesn't come from doubts or from uncertainty. You are not moved to one direction. You have to go to it and to fight with yourself and with others.
What influence did the last Chabad Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, Zichron Tzadik Livracha, have on your life? Did you meet him several times?
I met him a number of times. But when I met him first, face to face, it was in 1970, when I was very much into my work, in my life. Of course, I knew about him, and the connection began many years earlier. His influence was in many ways. First of all, being around and in all kinds of places, I have a chance to meet all kinds of people. Some of them famous people, some of them extraordinary people. He was surely not just unusual, but almost unique, and being a great man. See, there are people that have greatness in them. Greatness in one facet of the personality or another facet of personality, but they are not great in general. He was a great man in almost every aspect of what you can see about.
What influence did he have, if any, on your life?
We had lots of influence, indirect influence. Also, I was possibly one of those people who are common nudniks, to bother him with everything. There were several points in which I asked his advice and always followed it. Sometimes when I liked the answer, sometimes when I didn't like the answer. But it was the notion of there is somebody that I could trust, that knows better and means for the best. So in that sense, in many phases of my life, which I had to make decisions about things, he gave me some answer. For many years, many times, when I asked him, I got an offer for something like this or that, he would sometimes say no, sometimes with a reason or without a reason. So usually I would answer him. I'm asking you in order to accept your answer. But you see, sometimes you ask, I can do several things. What should I do? For that question, he never answered me. The only answer that he gave me was just short before he passed away. I said, I'm now dealing with 2 or 3 major subjects. Each of them is something that can take a whole lifetime. And I have 3 of them, and they are multiplying. What should I drop? That was the only time that he answered me. It was possibly the last letter that I got from him. And the answer was, don't drop anything. Stick to all the things that you are doing and try to find more. That was the answer. So now that I find myself sometimes entangled in more things, okay, I don't have time for almost anything. So I squeeze myself and do something more.
Would you agree with me that generally when people ask someone, what should I do, or their advice, they only want their own view confirmed?
I really didn't have a view because, see, I have done several things. Some of them with greater success, some of them with lesser success. And I thought that those things that I'm doing something that is useful and important. So my question was a real question. So I'm doing several things. And I've written perhaps more than 60 books. I don't count them because I'm writing so many of them. So some of them are successful, some of them less so, but I'm doing my writing. I do my work on Talmud. I did my work about Russia. I did my work about educational institutions. And I get involved in all kinds of things that some of them are things to tell people about, and some of them are not secrets, but I'm not going to speak about them. So questions always there. Should the person concentrate himself on doing one thing at least? No, his answer was that either I can do many things, or I'm not as brilliant in one side as I thought I am, or that sometimes in his view, which was very important in many ways, was that the times are now, on the one hand, moving in a much faster rate than they were ever before. So whatever can be done should be done now. 200-300 years ago, the pace of the world was much slower. So we could wait and we could prepare. Now, when things are changing in every way, from politics to geography to science to technology, the things that are unthinkable in the past are now facts. So because of the fast rate of change, it seems that people have to exert themselves to do 2 times, 3 times as much as they did in the past.
In part 2, Rabbi Steinsaltz will continue his conversation with me about his life and times and his great achievement of translating and explaining the whole Talmud, a work used for study all over the world. Welcome back to my conversation with Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. You adopted the name Even Israel, certainly for your academic work. What is the significance of this, and how would you translate this name into English?
That could be a continuation of your last question. I was going once to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and when I turned to go, he stops me and says, I think that you have to change your name. In fact, that's what I did. So it's not really my fault. I wasn't thinking about it, even though time to time, it happened to me to think it is possibly this name Steinsaltz is a foreign name. More than that, I have all kinds of doubts whether it was our original family name. I think it was adopted by my great-grandfather for trying to escape from the Russian army. So basically, I didn't have a sentiment for it. So he told me, came really out of the blue.
So you retained the part of your name Stein, which is Even.
Yes.
And now Even Israel. Can you explain it?
First of all, it's a biblical phrase. And it has all kinds of personal meanings for me. But basically, the Rock of Israel seems to be a fine name. I don't know if I'll become the Rock of Israel.
Well, that would become Tzur.
Yes, Tzur is also a rock. But even in that biblical context, in the book of Genesis, has the meaning of the Rock of Israel, the foundation of Israel. So I thought it is a good combination.
Now to your work with the Talmud. Were you aware when you began some 46 years ago, as you said, to work on this project to translate and comment upon the Babylonian Talmud, were you aware of the enormity of that task that encompassed these 46 volumes and how long it would take?
Surely not. I thought it will take at the utmost half of that time or less. Now, I didn't imagine that it would be such a long time and it would be such a huge effort. I just didn't know it. First of all, you have to take into account, I was a young man then, about 28. And young men sometimes have notions of some kind of a hubris, that you can do everything. But on the other hand, it wasn't just a simple work of sitting and writing.
Doing the work that you did means sitting down at a desk from morning to evening and studying the text. What about income?
I had to be entangled with lots of financial problems. They were not solved for me by any outside agency. I had all kinds of health problems that were stopping me in the way. And I was astonished that it takes such a long time. The books were luckily what they call basically welcome, which means they were sold. But still, there was always a problem of cash flow. There was always a problem of big gap between income and expenditure. So there were times when I had to get the help of others. Sometimes it worked, and sometimes it just delayed the work. One of the things that I clearly can claim, there are one or two things that I know that I'm not good at. I don't have any musical ear, which I deplore. And secondly, I have no talent in fundraising. None. The music is my own problem. The fundraising was a problem of the whole thing that I have been building. So when you don't have a talent, as they used to say also in Yiddish, if you cannot go above, you go from below. If you cannot take the high way, you take the low way. Sometimes you get there. But it takes time. It took more time than I would wish for.
When you did this work, did you do it all by yourself, or did you work from time to time with other scholars discussing?
At the beginning, almost everything was done by me, from Aleph to Taf, from Alpha to Omega. Later on, I found people to help me, but it was basically a work done by one person. I'm very thankful to all those people that helped and still help me in doing things. Writing a novel you can do on your own. Doing something like this, which has to be exact and based on enough sources, it means searching for things, trying to find things, trying to collate. All this is an enormous amount of work, and unluckily I am not a fast writer. So I have to give more time to do the same amount of work that I'm doing. As everybody else, I have to work with my handicaps, with them and against them.
As you progressed in the early years, did you find that your work, when it was published, was accepted easily?
It was basically accepted nicely. The work of any kind of an author is a very lonely work. You write in your own room, and you don't go in the streets to ask for people's opinions. But I did have their opinions. The books were used, and used quite extensively all over the world. In fact, one of my first entanglements with Russia was that these books came there many years before I came there, and they made an enormous impact there. So I could say that I wasn't just completely alone, but of course it was never easy.
Almost everyone, Jew or Gentile, has heard of the Talmud. It's been quoted and misquoted, and its content is frequently being used by anti-Semites to defame the Jewish people. Having been steeped in this study for so long, you are best qualified to answer my next question, because I have lots of Gentile listeners all over the world. What is the Talmud, and what does it contain?
One of the things that I think that I somehow achieved was by my work, among others, first of all, change a little bit the feeling about the word Talmud. The word Talmud, if you read it in all dictionaries, has a slightly, or more than slightly, derogatory connotation. I think that I helped to change it. I have written at least 2 works of introduction to the Talmud, trying to explain what it is. In a very short way, I would say it's a book that I don't think that there is any other book that is like that. In many ways, it's a unique work because it is a combination of any number of contradictions. It's a book that contains more questions than answers.
But can you explain what it is and who wrote it?
The Talmud wasn't written by one person. It wasn't written at all, basically. It was oral law, which means it was transmitted from a teacher to his disciples for many years. If one speaks about the names of people that are mentioned there, they take a span of about 1,000 years. And in these 1,000 years, there were many people that were involved. Some of them are more prominent. Some of them appear in the book only once, and some of them will appear hundreds of times. Some of them we know anything about them. About some others we know practically nothing but their name. Unlike the Bible, which not just divinely inspired, but it has names, more or less, of authors to the book. The Talmud is, in one way or another, a collective work of Jewish wisdom for about 1,000 years. It's collective because there were lots of people that were involved. And in many ways I said that the Jews, we created the Talmud, and in a different way, we are created by the Talmud, because the Talmud is one of the most important, known or unknown, sources of our nature, our qualities. So we become almost one with the book.
Did you come across passages in any of the Talmudic scripture with which you would totally disagree?
Basically not. I found lots of passages that I don't understand.
Could you give an example just of that?
There are all kinds of things that I don't understand. Sometimes I don't understand what they mean, just as simple as that. Sometimes I don't understand them in the context. Sometimes I don't understand why the decision goes this way and not the other way. So there are lots of things. The Talmud is a book that is all the time open to questions. So I have my own questions, as many others have their own, and I answer them. If I don't answer them this year, I may have a better answer in 20 years' time. And if I don't have an answer in 20 years' time, perhaps my grandchildren in their own life will find good answers.
Now that you've completed, I think, 46 volumes.
Which is the whole Talmud.
Okay. Are you again working on some other large projects now?
I find that I almost very unsuccessfully, I cannot get into small projects. I wish I would, because it's wonderful to begin a book, to finish it, and to know that I have the beginning and the end. Usually, if I do such things, they are on the side. I'm doing several things. I'm involved in a new edition commentary of the Rambam.
That's Rabbi Moses ben Maimon.
I'm being involved in a new edition about the Mishnah. Parts of it are contained in the Talmud, and parts of it are completely independent. And I'm also writing very much and working on a commentary on the Bible, except for other things that I'm doing all the time. But these are my main projects. Each of them is a project of years.
So you wouldn't want to retire?
I think that the idea of retirement is a ridiculous notion.
I agree.
See, sometimes you are retired by the Lord that tells you, okay, that's the time to stop. I cannot fight with him. But otherwise, I want to retire. Things that I still plan to do and I hope to do are, again, formidable work for many years of time. My plans are for the next 140 years. Then I may think about going back, perhaps tending my own garden and seeing how the roses bloom. The next 140 years I'm busy. The usual Jewish custom is less people to live to 120. It's not terribly realistic, but it is a kind of a guideline, which means some people do it when they're 60. Okay, I'm going to die in a few years, so I cannot begin anything. I'll vegetate, or I'll do something. Now, when you have a lifespan in planning of 120, it means that for the time now, you have 30 years ahead of you. So in 30 years, one can begin a new job, can learn a new language. So take my challenge, so to say. And it is sometimes strange to see how much people can achieve when they set themselves up to do whatever can be done. Because you see, when you are 20, you also don't know how long is your lifespan. So, but you make plans for a long time. If you make a plan for a long time, you can learn Hebrew. On the other hand, you have people that come here and they get the language because they put themselves, okay, I can begin. There was a man called Lander, Lander. He founded the Torah College. I met him when he was 90-odd, and he was then on his way, which he continued, to found new branches of this college. There's a person that could have, long time ago, just sit on a wheelchair. He began new things. There are lots of things to do. You know, there was the Pope, John the 23rd. He was elected when he was close to 80. The idea was that he will be there for a year or two, And then they will find somebody that they are more sure about. He made possibly more changes in the Catholic Church than almost anybody did for the last 400 years. So a person can begin a new life.
Back to education. Particularly your works, translated from the difficult-to-understand Aramaic, are used in seminaries for women to study the Talmud.
Yes.
Was it one of your intentions to introduce women to the Talmud, a study that, except, I believe, for Rashi's daughters, was until relatively recently very uncommon?
It was uncommon, but I don't know of anything that prohibits girls from studying Talmud. There may be all kinds of notions that possibly girls shouldn't be forced into study Talmud. But if they want to, that is one of those things that are written in every book of Jewish law, that girls can study if they want to. And therefore, there were surely not too many because of the general situation of women in the past. But there were always some women scholars.
What is your view now on this modern trend of women trying to emulate men, trying to practice some of the rituals which are in fact reserved for men?
Women of the Wall or others, I think it is ridiculous, both theologically and practically. Theologically, because they are not rituals. If there are rituals and symbolic rituals, you can do whatever you want. If there were rituals of the Rotary Club, of the Freemasons, they can do what you want. If there are commandments, they get their meaning and the sense only from being commandments, from being what they call divinely given to us. So I cannot do it otherwise. And if I want to change it, it's theologically strange. That is one thing. On the other hand, I also don't believe in this kind of trying to mimic or to act like somebody else is in any way a right way of doing things. I don't think that a cat should be a mouse and vice versa. Why should you do certain things that are not your job? No, sometimes part of modern times. You speak about equality. Equality has two basic notions that make sense. One of them is equality, legally speaking. The other one is equality as the divine soul. In many ways, you may say, modern democracy has two roots to it. One of them is the great way of building a certain society, and the other one is surely very much in the Jewish notion that all the souls of humans are equal, and therefore this is equality. There was an English biologist, Holden, and he wrote a book called The Inequality of Man, because we are so diverse and different. And to try to make all of us into one piece of uniform material is just basic waste of our potential and of what we can do.
I'm going to stop with the questions and ask you to tell us in a few words something appropriate for the times in which we live. Some advice for our lives, because the times in which we live are very hectic.
I would say, in one way, we are somehow looking too much outwardly. We look at events, we look at phenomena, and we don't look enough at ourselves. There's a famous poem in the Jewish literature which begins, Simu lev el hanshama, take care about your soul. So I think that that's what people need, because we are seeing too many things, we are experiencing too many experiences, and we have to take care of our own souls. We'll find there heaven and hell. We'll find there things that we know and we don't know. But we have to turn inside in order not to be swept all the waves that are coming and going every day.
Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, now known as Even Israel, may you have many more years to enlighten us with your wisdom. And thank you very much for having been on Walter's World.
Thank you.